One of the problems is they all thought of themselves as Pennsylvanians, Rhode Islanders, South Carolinians, much more than they thought of themselves as Americans. Patrick Henry, he really just electrifies everyone when he says, "I am no longer a Virginian, I am now an American." John Adams says the trick is to get 13 clocks to strike all at the same time, 13 ships to sail in the same formation. It's not easy.
13 conspirators against the crown. Finally, after 2 months of arguing and pontificating, the Congress adjourns with a unified message for England. Until colonial rights are restored, all 13 colonies will halt all trade with Great Britain. Local militias are to arm and stand in readiness. As one might expect, kings don't do well with ultimatums. No one tells the King of England what to do.
The die is now cast. The colonies must either submit or triumph. I do not wish to come to severer measures, but we must not retreat. I trust they will come to submit.
He makes the assumption that a simple show of force, of military might, will be enough to scare the rebels back to their senses.
Not likely. Certainly not in Boston. The city is a tinderbox waiting to explode. The British have turned it into a virtual police state. They have sealed off Boston Harbor, disbanded the colonial assemblies, and forced locals to house British troops. The man in charge is Commanding General Thomas Gage. His orders are to quash the rebellion. And while he has the guns, the rebels have the numbers. He repeatedly asks the Crown for a larger army.
Thomas Gage only has 3,000 soldiers in Boston. He's looking at 5,000 in Worcester County, 4,000 in Plymouth, all over like this. He's looking at this. He says, what am I going to do with my 3,000 people against force like this? He's playing a losing hand. He can't do anything, for which he is called an old woman.
He's very much a man in between. He's a military officer who is charged with a political task for which he's not really equipped to handle.
With Hutchinson's departure, Gage is now Massachusetts governor and commander of an occupying army that no longer faces a small rebellion. It is a population in uprising.
They start smuggling cannons out of Boston, and they start purchasing arms, and the militiamen start training, and they form the Minutemen. They actually sign associations. I will mobilize on a minute's notice.
This is no longer a skirmish over taxes. The Patriots believe their way of life, their liberty, and their property are at stake. Nothing short of war will settle it. In April 1775, Gage gets orders from England to break the uneasy stalemate. He will send a full force out to the countryside to seize a huge store of rebel ammunition. Unknown to Gage, Parliament, King George, or anyone else, the fate of the British Empire hangs on this decision. April 18th, 1775. British troops are on the march. Colonial militia are arming and stockpiling ammunition for what many fear is an inevitable showdown. British Commander General Thomas Gage has ordered his soldiers to capture a huge hidden store of gunpowder in Concord, a Massachusetts village 20 miles west of Boston.
The British detachment that marches out of Boston, roughly 800 soldiers, march out knowing that the countryside is on the verge of armed action. Once Gage sends that mission out, he really has set into motion a chain of events that is beyond his ability to control.
The British are indeed coming.
The news starts leaking out, and people start mobilizing. They're ready.
Out into the countryside to spread the word goes Paul Revere. whose engraving of the Boston Massacre fanned the flames of outrage 5 years earlier. Poems and school books will one day mythologize Revere's midnight ride as if he were the lone heroic messenger. But in fact, he is just one part of a whole system of communication.
Paul Revere is one of dozens, then scores, and literally hundreds of messengers going every which way. Bells are ringing, the shots are being fired. So before dawn, hours before dawn, the whole countryside is mobilized and knows what's happening.
They arrange a signal. One lantern light in Boston's Old North Church if the British are coming by land, and two if by boat. British troops row to the Cambridge side of the Charles River and wade through reeds and thick marshland to begin their overnight march to Concord. At around 1 in the morning at Lexington, Massachusetts, farmers, blacksmiths, and shopkeepers gather to intercept the British at Lexington Green. 130 civilians, some too old, some too young, most with no formal military experience, stand ready to risk it all against the world's most feared army.
These were men who literally felt under attack. And in fact, they were under attack. The British Army were walking out to seize colonial property, and they felt compelled to defend it.
2 a.m. After an hour of waiting, no sign of the British. The night's chill sends many home. Others choose nearby Buckman's Tavern to await another alarm. Most hoping it will never come. At 4:30 a.m., drums announce that the British are on their way.
I'm sure the mood on Lexington Green was extremely tense. The best trained, most professional army in the world is bearing down on them. So even though they were fired up with a great sense of injustice, they were probably nervous. And if they weren't, they should have been.
That's it. Okay. Stand back, lads. Stand back.
Both sides eye each other suspiciously, both sides not wanting to take a misstep. All of a sudden, a single shot is fired. Nobody knows who fired the shot. After the war and investigations, nobody ever found out. As soon as that shot was fired, both sides commenced firing at will, and the American Revolution was on.
In less than 2 minutes, 8 militiamen lay dead, 10 wounded.
It really lit up the newspapers everywhere. Blood had been shed, and there was really no looking back after that.
It will take 6 weeks for the news to reach London. By then, the course is set.
I think there's a recognition in London after Lexington that the battle has been joined, that the chances for preventing this conflict from degenerating into war has just about passed.
The conflict calls Benjamin Franklin home from London. After nearly 20 years in England, he is leaving for good, no longer loyal and no longer welcome. Branded a revolutionary traitor by the British, Franklin will set sail for his Philadelphia home to take a seat in the Continental Congress. A man of peace, he will now have to counsel war as he helps his fellow delegates navigate the new and bloody conflict that threatens to blow America apart. April 19th, 1775, Lexington, Massachusetts. For the first time ever, British soldiers and colonial citizens have stood face to face and fired upon each other. 8 colonists lay dead. But it's not over. The British continue their advance to get what they came for, the colonial ammunition stored in nearby Concord. Along the way, detachments of redcoats storm into local homes and ransack for weapons. The word spreads, and militia from all over the area rush toward Concord to head off the British. This time, it's the Americans who are coming.
They find not just the Concord militiamen, but all sorts of other militiamen coming and still coming and still coming and still coming.
The British are certain they can swat these militia away like pesky flies, and find that they cannot, that they've encountered hard-fighting men.
The British are badly outnumbered. They are forced to retreat. 16 miles separate them from the safety of Boston. 16 miles on foot. They are sitting ducks for armed and angry colonials. It is a trauma they won't soon forget.
All the hills on either side of us were covered with rebels, so that they kept the road always lined and a very hot fire on us without intermission. Henry de Bernier, British soldier.
"20 hours of constant barrage bring heavy losses to the beleaguered British. 73 dead, 174 wounded, and 26 missing. The Americans suffer 49 killed, with 40 wounded and 5 missing. By the time British soldiers get back to Boston, the colonials have the city surrounded, with militia from neighboring colonies on their way. Gage and his troops are trapped, with their backs to the sea.
The rebels have added insult to outrage. They have possessed the roads and other communications by which the town of Boston was supplied with provisions, and with a preposterous parade of military arrangement, they have effected to hold the army besieged. Thomas Gage.
3 weeks later, on May 10th, 1775, Benjamin Franklin is back home in Philadelphia, just as the Continental Congress is called back into emergency session. The bloodshed in Massachusetts demands a new colonial strategy. Assembling a continental army and complete independence from England are subjects now on the table. The delegates eagerly await the thoughts of their venerated elder statesman, Benjamin Franklin, only to find him unusually quiet and withdrawn. The long voyage from England has made him ill, but it is the short trip he will soon make that troubles Franklin most. Franklin is headed to a confrontation with his only son, 43-year-old William. The rift in the colonies has brought a terrible split between father and son. William Franklin has been New Jersey's royal governor for over a decade, a post granted him by the king, owing in no small part to being Benjamin's son. William is vehemently opposed to the rebellion and unalterably devoted to the king. Now, his father will make one last attempt to win him over to the Patriot side. Once they were as close as a father and son could be. It was William who held the kite during his father's famous experiment with lightning. It was William who was his father's constant companion in the early days in England. But now, neither the strife in the colonies nor the humiliation heaped upon his father by the British turns William away from the king. Now, father and son must choose between country and family, but neither will bend. Like the growing civil war between patriots and loyalists, reconciliation between father and son is no longer possible.
There were two sides to this issue. Most people could have seen both sides. Everyone had reasons to see those sides. Franklin isn't buying it, and he gives his son, he's absolutely unyielding with his son.
Nothing has ever hurt me so much and affected me with such keen sensation as to find myself deserted in my old age by my only son. And not only deserted, but to find him taking up arms against me in a cause wherein my good fame, fortune, and life were all at stake.
When I think about Benjamin Franklin, the great revolutionary, and his son, the leader of those conservative loyalists, it seems very strange to me that the old man should be the radical and the young man should be the conservative.
Once they were inseparable. Now the wound between father and son will never heal.
William Franklin doesn't get very good press in the American textbooks, but you know there were many others just like William Franklin. Which side are you on? That became the question.
The political argument that tears the Franklins apart will also be replayed in thousands of colonial families. Politics have become intensely personal.
Every American had to choose. Do I support the Patriots? Do I support the Loyalists? Is there any neutral ground between them?
A bitter time is coming when everyone must choose sides, when fathers may have to fight sons, when brother may fight brother. There are twice as many patriots in the colonies as loyalists, but more than half the population just wants to be left alone. In the coming months and years, no one can remain on the sidelines. The ship has sailed. The revolution is on an irreversible course. It will take sturdy leadership from men as different in temperament as the people they represent. Whether they know it or not, these are the men of destiny who will guide the American people into their uncertain future. And these are the men who will shed their blood and give their lives to make it happen.